Good day, lovely people. Welcome to the Too Many Guys Soccer Show. This is Professor Matt, and this is going to be what I think is going to be a series of Central Eastern European League shorts. Mainly because we haven't really had that much time to discuss the individual leagues on the show proper. What I've decided to do is kind of do, and expect one of these every couple months, a kind of, check in on the leagues that are happening. And, in this case, two leagues that are ending and talk a little bit about Central or Eastern European players that have been transferred, particularly those who have gone west. Uh, and so, because we took that hiatus there for a bit, we didn't have a chance to discuss that. So, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to do a recap of some leagues. We're going to go from east to west. I'll start with the Kazakh and then the Belarus league that are wrapping up. In the case of the Kazakh league, they're wrapping up actually this weekend because they're on the old Soviet spring to autumn calendar. And talk a little bit about the state of the leagues. Then we'll talk about Ukraine, and I'll explain why we're doing this. We're introducing sort of another regional league, Croatia. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about some big name transfers uh, that have moved from Eastern European leagues to the West, including two Russian, well, one Georgian, one Russian player who have moved respectively to Italy and Spain from the RPL. So let's get started. Kazakhstan, the Kazakh Premier League, which we've been following. Uh, that's pretty much all wrapped up. The final match day is this Sunday, and the title has already been won. Ordubasi on 55 points have claimed the league, and right they'll get that Champions League playoff spot, right, because there's not automatic qualification. Uh, there is some the European places are set, but there is some debate about you know, finishing after that. Astana and Akobe are in second and third, respectively, on 49 and 48 points. And those two spots are Conference League. So it's up for grabs in terms of seeding. But both of those clubs, their European futures for next season, are very much secure. Kairat, which is the sort of traditional Soviet era team who played in what used to be the capital, Almaty, which I sort of gravitated to, became my team, quote unquote. They finished fourth on 40 points. Not a terrible campaign. Uh, it was weird though throughout the course of the season watching them. It was like watching 2013, 2014 Liverpool. They scored the most goals in the league, and they had the league's leading goal scorer, João Paulo. But they also conceded the most goals in any of the top half of the table teams. So a lot of offense, fun team to watch, but the defense is, well, there are problems. Uh, Before I go on this, what I'm going to do with all of these leagues is kind of just bring up players that I've seen who I think are interesting and potentially could make some moves to the West. The only player really in the Kazakh league, I know João Paulo was the leading goal scorer, but he's a 35-year-old Brazilian man. I think, the Kazakh Premier League is kind of his level. The one player that really stuck out to me this season is a Uzbek, actually, so not a Kazakh, an Uzbek box-to-box midfielder by the name of Shakobaz Uramov. He's a 24-year-old, and I was aware of him a couple years ago because he signed for Beta Borisov in Belarus, but he barely played. But as far as I'm concerned, he was critical to Ordubasi's title run and probably was their best player, if I can be totally honest, throughout the course of the campaign, and arguably the best player in the league. He's a traditional box to box midfielder. He can play 10, he can play six, but he's really an eight. And he's a guy to keep an eye on. I think his stock is on the rise, and if Uzbekistan makes a run at the Asian Cup in January, he probably is going to be a big part of it. And he's a guy to keep an eye on because I think he's a player who could potentially get moved, not necessarily to a big club in Western Europe by any means, but maybe a mid-tier like German or Spanish side or Italian side can take a look at him. He's very useful and he's versatile, but I think he's probably an eight. Moving on to another league that's almost wrapped up, the Belarus Premier League. There's five more match days. The final match day is, I believe, the first weekend in December. And unlike in Kazakhstan, we have a legit title race. The last couple of weeks going to be pretty fun. Dynamo Minsk, who are still in first on 54 points. A couple months ago, it looked like they should have this wrapped up by now. Their form has kind of dropped a bit, and in the meantime, Neman Godorno has been playing absolutely out of their mind over the course of the last month and a half. And so we have a situation where you have Dynamo Minsk at 54 points in first, which would be a Champions League playoff spot. Gordino at 51 points, so only a 3 point gap, but Dynamo Minsk also has a 7 point or 7+ point goal difference, so that could come into play. In second place, which is the Europa League playoff spot. So that should be interesting. And then there's another European spot, which is third place, currently held by Torpedo Belaz, and they have 38 points. So it's the title race is really just one and two. But that race for the last European spot is crazy. So you have Torpedo at 3 on 38. You have Slavia Moroz at 30 and fourth at 35 points. Ilsach Minsk, that I never heard of until this year, at 34 and fifth. Gomel, who won the league a couple years ago, at 33. And Beta Borisov, which is the flagship club and the club that always seemed to be in the Europa League from Belarus for decades, at 7 at 32. So there's only really a 6 point gap between third and seventh with five match days coming up. So if you're interested, you can watch the Belarus League free on YouTube with Belarusian commentary. Unfortunately, no English language. There's a title race, but this race for that final European spot can get rather interesting. A player in this league who you should be excited about, Vladislav Mirazov, who is the number 9 for Dynamo Minsk, 38-year-old. He has had a remarkable calendar year. Well, actually, not even calendar year, just turn of the year. He scored 13 goals in the league and joined top goal scorer. He scored 4 in the Belarus Cup and 2 for the national team, Belarus. He just got called up for the first time, I believe, in the summer. He's a very interesting player to watch, and he's very much the sort of modern new age number 9. He's not an old school target man. But he's not a false nine either. He can do a little bit of both. And if I had to compare him to a player, he'd be kind of like a B-Tech Gabriel Jesus. Uh, he's just scratching his potential. I had heard whispers of this guy a couple years ago when he was in the youth setup for Belarus, but I'd never really seen him play. He's a really interesting player. He's a young player who's just scratching his potential. And it's high time that we get some Belarusian talent in Western Europe. It wasn't that long ago when the likes of Alexander Heeb was playing for Arsenal and Barcelona. Sasha Pavlovic played all over the place, played in Germany, played in Italy, played in Portugal, played in Poland. So it's not like there haven't been Belarusian players playing in Western Europe. There haven't been the last couple of years, partially because, geopolitical realities. Belarus is kind of on the West's shit list. but also too because look, there has been a downward spiral in terms of the national team setup. Belarus had a rather interesting, talented generation of players about a decade and a half ago, and things have not been very good since. Uh, Morozov might be an outlier. He might be the front line of what could be a new quote unquote golden generation, what have you. But he's a guy who already at age 23, I think, has outgrown this league. And if not for the war in Ukraine, he'd probably wind up either on a RPL or a Ukrainian league team. But with those options now kind of off the table by and large, a move to, maybe a Czech team or Dinamo Zagreb, more about them in a little bit when we talk about Croatia. Something like that would probably make sense, and he could use that as a springboard, maybe to make an even bigger move. Ukraine. So the league is about 1/3 of the way through. We're on match. This will be match day 11, this upcoming Sunday, or actually this upcoming. I believe there's a match on Friday, so the 20th of October. And right, if you, it's been a strange season, and that's to be expected because they're playing football in a war zone. And there's been plenty of cancellations. More about how that's impacted the table in a second. Uh, as we know, first place is automatic uh, Champions League. Second place is Champions League playoff. Third, fourth are Europa League, and then fifth is Conference League because of the higher coefficient, obviously, versus Kazakhstan or Belarus. But if you look at the table, and it's early, it's pathetically early, and Ukraine, unlike Belarus and Kazakhstan, who still are on the old, and I really should say old, because the Soviet Union, the Soviet League had moved to a quote unquote normal European schedule by the 1980s. But the old Soviet spring to autumn calendar, Ukraine starts in late July, and then they wrap up in May with most of the other European leagues. So they in between they have that long winter break. And you really, as far as I'm concerned, stuff doesn't really get real until after that winter break, until like March when they come back. So if you look at the table, it's kind of weird. Some of the big hitters, the clubs that we expect to be on top in this league, aren't there. Dnipro won, which finished in second place last season. They're mid-table. Now, to be fair, that's to be expected because they lost arguably their best player in the summer. But even some of the other, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, even some of the other usual suspects aren't where you think they probably should be. In first place, and they've played 10 matches. A lot of these teams haven't even played the full 10 because of missile strikes, air raids. It's just not safe. Is Polosia Zimitar on 19 points. This is a small club. They were in the Pashaya Liga, so the first league, a couple years ago. They've been a yo-yo club though. They have some pedigree in the Ukrainian Premier League, but they're outsiders. Let's be real. Second place with 9 matches played is Shakhtar with and 18 points. Kiribati, who have they've been sort of mid-table since about the early, the late aughts, uh, on 17. Chernomorets Odessa on 16, and all three of those have played 9 matches. And then in fifth place, Dynamo Kiev on 15 points, but they've only played 7. How do we account for this? Well, a lot of it goes back to cancelizations. Only a handful of clubs have actually played 10 full matches. The other is there's been a lot of turnover with some of the big clubs. I'll talk about Zoroya Luhansk in a little bit. I'll talk about Alexandria as well when I talk about surprises. Uh, Dnipro, again, they've lost their best player. Shakhtar are second, and betting against Shakhtar in the league over the last decade and a half is kind of like betting against Man City in the Prem, but they have some issues. Uh, there's been a lot of player turnover in the last year. Mudryk, obviously at Chelsea, uh, their goalkeeper left over the summer, and right there's this injury crisis at one particular position. It's almost like Liverpool a couple years ago with the center backs. Uh, Valery Bendor, who is one of the better young Ukrainian defenders. He got hurt in match day one, and he's done so for the year. He might come back at some point after the winter break, but it's likely we will not see him. Rakititsky, who came back, the prodigal son, uh, he was missing in action for a month and a half with injury as well, and he's back now, but he's an older player. He's not 100. I don't think he's 100% match fit yet. Uh, and if you look at the rest of their center backs, I mean, it's so you have Matvey Matvienko, who's the normal left-sided center back, and he's fine. He's very good, in fact. But then, and this was really felt when Rakititsky missed time. You have a 18-year-old Israeli by the name of Lemkin, who apparently does hold a Ukrainian passport, so maybe he'll become Ukrainian. I don't know. Right, his family's from Ukraine, but he's born in Israel. Who I knew nothing about. Uh, a Tanzanian fellow by the name of Miroshi, who was gobbled up on deadline day on a loan deal, and he hasn't played at all. Totally unknown to me. And then they on deadline day they also signed Dmitro Chernysevsky. If that name sounds familiar to you, cast your minds back to like MSN Barcelona. So he played at Shakhtar in like the aughts and then got a big move to Barcelona. He was a fringy squad guy, never really stamped his authority on that team. But to be fair, that was kind of tough. And then he's been this kind of journeyman. I thought, because the last time I saw him, he was with the Ukrainian national team in 2016, the disaster Euro campaign when Ukraine lost all three matches, including 2-0 to Northern Ireland. I thought he was retired. Apparently, he's been playing in Greece. I don't follow the Greek Super League, so I can tell you that. Guys, he's almost my age. He's 39, and he is effectively their number three choice center back. And if Rakititsky would have to miss any extra time or additional time, or let's say nightmare scenario, Matvienko gets hurt, he's going to be starting, and that is a problem. Shakhtar played well, but they are clearly not their dominant selves, and to the point that their manager, who I thought overachieved last year, got canned, and they have an interim guy, club legend and Croatia legend Dario Sana. Uh, I've always been a big Dario fan. Right. And I think it's cool that, even though he could have easily played in the West, he decided to stay and, captain Shakhtar. But I don't know what kind of manager he is. He was an assistant at Shakhtar. He, had some role in the Croatia setup at one point. But this is going to be interesting. This is not your older brother Shakhtar. And I think things are kind of up for grabs, which as a Dynamo Kiev fan, I'm kind of loving because if you put a gun to my head today and said, who do you think's going to win the UPL? I'd probably say Dynamo. They're in fifth place at the moment, but they've played 7 as opposed to 10 or 9 matches. And, last year Dynamo looked rudderless, but a lot of that was the squad that won the league a couple years ago kind of aged out, much like Shakhtar now, and definitely Dnipro. They sold their best player in Viktor Tashankov, uh, and they haven't really replaced him, or they didn't really replace him. Last season was kind of a mess, and right, we have an old ass Romanian man as our manager, Muhescu, and he's been dealing with health issues, but he's back. He is healthy. They did some things over the summer that I really liked. The squad is like the perfect mix of veterans, and including one important veteran, and a good mix of youth. On the veteran side of the equation, look, Andrei Yarmolenko is back, and he's been having a good season. 4 goals, uh, 3 assists, and he's being used sparingly. He's filled that void on the right wing that was vacated by Viktor Tashankov, but he's being used. His minutes are being monitored because he's not the same guy. He had his share of injury issues. At West Ham, at Dortmund. So he's played well. Uh, Vitaly Baikalski, and it's a shame. I mean, at this point, he's too old to seriously make a move to the West, but he probably should have. Can play 10, can play 8, 6 goals, 3 assists, having a player of the season kind of campaign so far. And then with the young guys, 21-year-old Vladislav Venant, who part of Dynamo's issues, geez, since the turn of the last decade, has been the number 9 position. We've tried all kinds of different guys. Artem Bizladen, who would trick you and then he'd get hurt or suspended because allegedly he really likes cocaine. Fran Sol, the random Spanish guy we had for a while. Right, really since probably Tadeusz Tarkowski, who like was a decent, Polish striker, but none to write home about. We haven't really had a number 9. Uh Venat could be that guy. Big, tall, sort of old school target man, but with a little bit more to his game. So actually kind of reminds me of Darwin Nunez. 4 goals in the league, and he's looking like a piece for not just the now but for the future, and a guy who probably should get a run out in the national team sooner rather than later. Another 21-year-old who has gotten a run out in the national team is Vladimir Brozhenko. Uh, Defensive midfielder, can also play the 8, but I think his real position is the 6th. He is I thought he was one of the best players in the league last year when he was on loan to Zaroya. And I'll talk about Zaroya in a second. I think his absence explains a lot in terms of their struggles. Uh, he fits the bill when it comes to a modern DM. He's not an old school destroyer, although he has that in him. And I think the older he gets and the more he kind of fills out, because he's one of those guys where you can tell his frame's still kind of filling out, at least in terms of putting on muscle. Uh, but he's also extraordinarily creative. He has 3 goals on the season, 2 headers and one absolute, disgusting uh, outside the box shot. And he's full of energy, and his passes completed rate is silly. I think he's second in the league, only behind Bukowski. If Dynamo Kiev can have a little bit better luck in terms of their fixtures, right? Because all the 3 matches that had to be postponed, one was because of European qualifying, and the other 2 because of straight up air raids. Uh, and if they can stay healthy, I think they're probably, your favorite. I'm reluctant to bet against Shakhtar because, again, betting against Shakhtar seems foolish. But there's been a lot of changing. There's been a lot of chopping. And they're one big center back injury from a world of pain. Uh, right. And oh yeah, Shakhtar has brought in I guess it's back to the future for them after relying on a lot of younger domestic talent like Modric, Sudakov, who, if rumors are to be believed, he may be on the move in January, which would weaken them even further. They've bought, four Brazilians over the course of the summer, but all these guys are 17, and we haven't seen them yet. So, I mean, that's more of a move for the future as opposed to the now. Uh, Really briefly, just some surprises on the positive. Chornomorets Odessa, I guess, although if you guys recall, when we were talking about the Ukrainian League last year, towards the end of last season, not only did I say I thought that they would get out of the relegation zone, and they did. I said that they would comfortably. Uh, this there's no reason why this shouldn't be a big squad. In fact, when the Ukrainian League was at its heyday, which I would argue was like the aughts into the early teens, they were part of, I guess, what you would call the Big Six. Uh, but they've been badly run. They haven't been a very financially stable club, and there's all kinds of rumors too that the old head of the Ukrainian FA punished them because Odessa tends to be a more quote unquote Russophone area, and they were being punished because they weren't Ukrainian enough. I think that's a load of dog shit. They've just been badly run, but they have a new sporting director, they have a new manager, and right, with financial stability after years of chaos, they've got a pretty stable squad. Uh, and I can easily see them ending the season still in one of these European spots. I don't think they're you know uh Champions League or Europa League level, but I think, well, actually I do think they're Europa League level. Uh but they're definitely Conference League level. I think they'll finish somewhere between third and fifth. The other surprise is just outside the European zone, Ruk Lviv. And I said this last year, I'll say it again. This team, their story, and the fact that they, have not just stayed up, but have also played some really good football is remarkable because this is a full-on academy. This isn't a club in the traditional sense. This is like, you know, this is like if Liverpool's under 21 team played in the EPL and finished, I don't know, eighth or something. It's a remarkable story. I hated Marvin Martinovich as Ukraine's manager. I thought he played satanic football. I did not like the guy, but I will give Martinovich his flowers here. This project that he has created in his hometown has been remarkable, especially with the average age of the squad. They're the youngest squad in the league by far. I think the average age is actually 18. So like these are kids. These are my students at Temple or something, playing ball in a top league, and playing good but competitive ball. In terms of surprises, I guess on the negative side of the equation, you have to go to the bottom of the table. Alexandria, who have been, kind of sniffing the European spots. They were in the Europa League a couple seasons ago. They're terrible. There's no other way to put that. Now, to be fair, there's context. When they came up and when they made that run that got them into the Europa League, they had a very good young squad that had largely been together from their time in the Pashaya League. That body has been picked clean. And indeed, if you look at some of those names, they're now playing for Dynamo Kiev. They're playing for Shakhtar. A couple of them are on, Chernomorets. So that's not to be surprising. Zoroya Luhansk, however, is. And I mean, there are some reasons I can give you why they're bad, but I really can't put my finger on it because they are the textbook of stability in terms of Ukrainian squad. They haven't finished any lower than fifth since the turn of the last decade. This is a place that turns out and generates talent, but it's a mess. Now, part of it is they last season they did fairly well, but a lot of those guys were Dynamo Kiev or Shakhtar players on loan for Zhako, who I thought was their best player. They sold their leading striker, Nazari Rusin, Dynamo Kiev reject, uh, over the summer. He's now plying his trade in Poland. But there's still enough talent. There wasn't as much turnover there as, let's say, there was at Shakhtar for them to be this bad. Now they are on their fourth manager in the last two seasons. You know, their manager at the time of the Russian invasion volunteered to, go fight the enemy and picked up his AK-47. And they've been sort of through managers like use tissues. And so that definitely plays a part. But for a team which again is has been the hallmark of stability and has arguably the most exciting young goalkeeper in Ukraine at the moment, in Alexander Saputin, it's kind of crazy that they're currently in the relegation playoff spots. Now, do I think they finish there? Probably not. I think there's going to be a correction of the table. And like I said, for me, things really don't get real until after the winter break. But they have been definitely a surprise in the negative direction. Before we move on to, some transfers that happened over the summer, I want to introduce a new league to our Eastern European discussions, and that's the Croatian Premier League. And me and Mike, both on air and off air, we're talking about, hey, we need to like maybe pick another, and we're talking about the Czech league, and we might do that. I chose the Croatian league mainly because of a conversation I had with a dear friend uh, at my cousin's wedding back in August. And if he's listening, hi, Marty. Uh, Marty, who's a dear friend of my uncle and his wife, and who is Croatian. I think he was born in the United States, but his family, he's first generation Croatian, speaks the language fluently, and he's been doing fantasy football, gridiron football, and baseball with us for years now. Uh, and he's a guy who I've formed a little bit of a relationship with over the years because of our love for footy, and we call Croatian national team. So I saw him at the bar, at the wedding, and he was like, "You should pay attention to the Croatian league this year because there's going to something very interesting is happening." And I was like, "Well, okay." When you think of the Croatian league, the only club that really comes to mind, especially for people that aren't familiar with the history of the game, pre-Croatian independence, in the Yugoslav era, is Dinamo Zagreb. And there's a reason for that. They are Bayern Munich and more of the Croatian league. They've dominated this league. And, we were talking about this last year when they beat Chelsea in Europe. If you want to get a sense of, the next big things in the Croatian national team setup, you look at, Dinamo Zagreb. But it's not just Croatian players. I mean, Danny Olmo was playing for Dinamo Zagreb. Something like what my friend suggested at that open bar at that wedding back in August, he's right. The monopoly seems to be cracking. And I think if there's a season that you can take Dynamo, it's this one. At the moment, we have a title race. In first place, we have Hajduk Split on 21 points. I'll talk a little bit about them in a minute. In second, you have Rijeka on 19. And then in third, they're separated by goal difference. Dinamo Zagreb also at 19. This can be a rather fun little exercise watching this league over the next couple months because Dinamo Zagreb, it's clearly a club in transition and it's opened up space, particularly for Hajduk. I think Hajduk's going to win the league for the first time in eons. And the reason I suggest that is I've been watching them play, and they are the most complete team in this league. And they also have some weird talent that listeners to the podcast probably aren't aware of, but which I am. Uh, they have arguably the best number nine in the league in Marco Levaya. I know Petrovic is at Dinamo, but he's had a very stop and go kind of season. Levaya is a very good natural goal scorer, and I think probably should get more of a chance with the Croatian national team. Uh, and definitely, especially if Hajduk win the league, probably is up for a move for Western Europe. Two guys who I think definitely should be possible targets, transfer targets for European teams, is their center back combo. Uh, Two young center backs. Well, I shouldn't say young. They're both in their like early to mid 20s. They're just reaching their peak. Uh, Filip Oramovic and Zovimir Saria. I probably wouldn't know these guys, but before the people in the Kremlin decided to do the things they did, I followed the RPL and I got to see both of these guys. Oramovic he's a tank. Uh he is a tank and he's a very progressive, modern center back. And he played for Rubin. And right, he was Startfeld's uh center back partner that year that Rubin probably should have, you know, finished second. They ultimately finished third, but they got into the Europa League. Uh and then, Saria is a really interesting one. He was briefly at CSKA Moscow when he was like 20. No, I think he was 19. I think he was a teenager. And he was billed by his agent as his game is reminiscent of the Berezovsky brothers. That was PR just to get a contract and, a nice agent fee from a Russian club, and particularly that Russian club, CSKA, the club of the Berezovsky boys. Uh, he didn't look like the Berezovsky brothers while there. He looked quite lost, but he's now a little bit older, a little bit more seasoned, and he looks immense. Uh, the future center back pairing of the Croatian national team, once, men like Dejan and, Vida finally decide to hang it up, uh, could be these two guys, a combination of Guardiol, obviously, and one of these two guys. Uh, and so watch out for the Croatian Premier League. We have a title challenge, and this shows you as this says as much about my feelings about Dortmund and pretty much the entire rest of the field in Germany. I think that there's a better chance that Hajduk break Dinamo Zagreb's monopoly than I do any of the Bundesliga teams breaking Bayern Munich's. Summer transfers. There's a couple names I want to bring up. Four, in fact. The first two are Ukrainians. The other two, one's a Georgian, one's a Russian, although I apparently he's looking for an Armenian passport. But who have left the RPL. Let's start with the Ukrainians first. Anatoly Turbin, 22-year-old goalkeeper, had an absolutely brilliant last two seasons for Shakhtar. Best goalkeeper in the UPL, far and away. There is a genuine debate if he should be Ukraine's number one, and he's gotten, if you've been paying attention to qualification, he has actually gotten some starts. He was moved to Benfica, and to be honest, 22 for a goalkeeper is young. And I've always been a little hesitant for some of these younger East European goalkeepers moving west that early, because usually what happens is they wind up being the number two, maybe the number three. and their progress and their development gets blocked. The textbook example here is Andre Lunin at Real Madrid, former Zorya Luhansk goalkeeper. And I've been saying this before. I think he's the most talented Ukrainian goalkeeper in the world at the moment. But because he doesn't get regular playing time in Spain, even after the Courtois injury, he's just he's missed the boat. He's just sitting there on the bench. Turbine, on the other hand, has not just gone to Benfica, he's also taken over and he's nailed on their number one now, not just in the league, but also in the Champions League. And he's looked pretty good. He's made some mistakes, but he's 22, so not even remotely in his prime for a goalkeeper. And he with some of these guys, I'm going to make comparisons. I can't really give you a comparison for Turbin. All I will say is he's a modern goalkeeper. He's a good shot stopper, but he's good in possession. He's good in his feet. So if you want to play outside the back, uh, he can do that. And right, definitely someone to watch. And like I said, there's a real genuine conversation that he should be the Ukraine's number one. Bushen is a adequate goalkeeper, but that's all he is. Another Ukrainian, Artem Diobik, who I've always referred to as Ukrainian Divock Origi because when the Ukrainian national team has needed a big goal, he's the guy who's come in and just shithoused and got that goal. Although I think his game is different from Origi. Give me a second here. He made the move to Girona in Spain, and Girona is like I guess they're my unofficial Spanish team now because they're effectively the Ukrainian national team in disguise. The two-thirds of their front three are Ukrainians. Jovic at the 9 and Viktor Tashankov at right wing. Uh, he's a little older. He's 26. He's kind of one of those classic Eastern European late bloomers. He was a guy who came up through the old Dnipropetrovsk youth system when that club, went under, literally. He was one of those exiles. He played for Midtjylland in Denmark, and he did okay. He returned to Ukraine at the new, Phoenix Dnipro 1 club, and all he did for the last 2 years is lead the freaking league in goal scoring. Uh, and he's a big man, but don't be fooled. He's not Olivier Giroud. He's a big man with hold up play. He can do a lot of, different things. And I got to be honest, he's got a little bit of Darwin Nunez in him because he's fast. Nunez is faster, but he's got that speed. But he's almost like a homeless man Harry Kane because his hold-up play is really quite excellent. And he's been leading the line for the Ukrainian national team. And him and Tashankov, because Girona's having a pretty good season in La Liga so far, they're forming a nice little partnership there. And, hey, long may that continue. The last two guys I want to talk about both are both byproducts of the Dynamo Moscow youth setup. Dynamo Moscow haven't won silverware in a long time. KGB tax, Beria tax. But for about the last decade, they've had the best youth setup in Russia, and I don't think it's even close. And so two of their young players, both of whom I think have really bright futures ahead of them, have made the move west. And now, who can get in, who can get out, who can do deals in Russia is really mysterious. Some clubs are like Zenit, which is effectively owned by Vladimir Putin, and CSKA, which is owned by the army. are sanctioned. Some clubs, including Dynamo Moscow, which is technically owned by the Dynamo Sports Society, which used to be connected to the secret police. Apparently, it has zero connections with the FSB now. They're not sanctioned, but who can go where, what like so certain European leagues like Spain or Italy, as long as you're on a club that isn't fully sanctioned, you can move. The business can be done. Uh and so the first player to move was center back Shaba Sazanov, which despite his last name, he's actually Georgian. His father was Russian, his mother was Georgian. He was born in Moscow. Very, similar story. Uh Young Shaba, right, because he's only 21. Uh got the memo and decided to cash in on his mom's Georgian heritage and got that Georgian passport. Uh he got sold to Torino. And he's a guy that before I stopped watching the RPL, was, on my list of guys to watch. Uh I saw a bit of him that when before the invasion, he wasn't, playing regularly with the first team. Apparently, that only happened this past season. But I saw him a bit in the cups. He's got great size, a unit of a freaking man. But I got a chance to watch him up close in the summer during the U20 World Cup, where, quite frankly, Georgia surprised the ever living crap out of me. And I gotta be honest, this kid, he reminds me a lot of a young Ibrahim Kanate. He has that size, he has that speed. Is he the most graceful at times? Hell no. But he's a really interesting center back prospect. And I'll be honest, I think he was Georgia's that under 20 Georgia team. I think he was their best player. He held everything together. The other guy who made a move from Dynamo Moscow, I actually want to spend some time on because it's a name that I've mentioned on the podcast before. Chelsea was all up and in on him, but because the English FA has effectively prevented business from any Russian club, that move never materialized. There were some rumors in the spring that he was going to move to Toulouse. Excuse me, not Toulouse. What's the Strasbourg, which is like Chelsea's affiliate in France. Bowley has a hand in that apparently, but that move never materialized because apparently he and his agent were like, "No, we're not going to Strasbourg," because that would have then facilitated a move to Chelsea, but that never happened. The guy I'm talking about is Arsene Zakarian, and right, he made a move to Real Sociedad. I came on this podcast, and before he was a known commodity, I was singing the praises of Krivacha Krevadishvili at Napoli. And I had saw him, geez, when he was a 17-year-old on loan at Lokomotiv Moscow, but then in particular at Rubin Kazan. Zakarian is maybe more talented, which I know is saying a lot, than Kravashvili. His ceiling actually might be higher. Those two were, for me, the two most exciting young players in the RPL before I checked out. This kid, and he's Russian, he has a Russian passport. He's Armenian through his father's side. There's talk that he might become Armenian, which God bless him, I kind of hope he does, but we're not certain about that yet. FIFA has weird, funny rules. Maybe they'll make an exception. I don't know. I kept hearing his name years ago before I ever saw him play. Like, this guy is going to be the future of the Russian national team setup, what have you. He played sparingly in the league, but he made his debut for Dynamo Moscow as a 17-year-old. Any 17-year-old that gets first team football, and it wasn't a substitute, he was starting at age 17 in any league. there's talent. You're doing something right. He really stuck out for me though at the 2021 under 21 Euros. And this is why I swore that Sven Botman was crap, because Arsene Zakarian took Sven Botman to the freaking cleaners. He stole his lunch money. He came to his house. He stole his dad's beer. He may have slept with his sister. I don't know. He put him on smoke. He abused him. And I was like, I don't see what anyone saw about Sven Botman. This 17-year-old Russian kid just took him to school. He's an extremely interesting player. And he's a player where I'm not even certain what his best position is, in so much that he can play, he's been used out wide. He can play both left and right wing. You know, uh, he can use both feet. And he doesn't look out of place on the wing. He looks like a proper winger. Maybe not, the sort of outside, inside, forward that we're so used to now, more of a old school creative winger. But unlike, let's say, Mudryk, who I'd also put in that category as really exciting young Eastern European player, uh, it's not just the creativity and his footballing IQ, which is well beyond his years. This guy can finish. He was the third highest goal scorer in the RPL a couple years ago. Uh, and so he can play out on the wing, but he can also play 10. And indeed, when he was playing for the under 21 Russian squad, that was his position. And he was wreaking havoc. Uh, but he can also play as a creative number 8. This kid is good. And it's very interesting and very exciting because he moved to Sociedad, who are in the Champions League for the first time in a long time. He's not a full-on starter yet, but I think by the end of the season he is going to be. And he's almost like, nailed on first sub off the bench. He's played some in La Liga, he's played some in the Champions League. And all I'm going to say is this kid is exciting. First of all, I'm thrilled that he's out of Russia. But I will say this, like, it would not shock me that in a year or two, he's no longer playing for Sociedad, and he has made the move to a bigger Spanish side, a bigger side in Italy or Germany, or the Premier League. I think this guy is at the moment probably Levy. Would he start for some of the big teams in the league? No, but he'd start for like mid-table squads, and he definitely would be an asset for a big squad. A comparison, it's tough. I've heard him compared to De Bruyne, and I can certainly see why. Especially now that his defensive work and his defensive, skill set has improved. Because when I first watched him, he was if you played him as an 8, you were taking a big risk. Now, not so much. Uh, Certainly in terms of the creativity and the footballing IQ, I can see that comparison. But and this is saying a lot. There's a flair about his play. He's more of a flair player than De Bruyne's ever been, and you could play De Bruyne out wide on the wings, but it's going to look awkward. When he's on the wing, there's no awkwardness. It's like almost that's his natural position. That's why it's like I don't know where he fits because he plays all these different positions and he plays them well. I see some De Bruyne. I see a lot of Felipe Coutinho. Uh, and so, needless to say, I think this guy is going to be really good. And I don't know if a certain team from Merseyside decides to cash in on a certain Egyptian over the summer. Like I've said before, I don't think you can replace that Egyptian, but I think it's a question of finding one, two, three, four guys who maybe can replace that Egyptian's output. If Arsene Zakarian is part of that equation, I'd be a very happy man. Uh he's a really exciting young player. And it's funny, I would normally have no interest in following Real Sociedad. I have no connection with that club at all. but I'm going to be watching them in the Champions League. I'm going to be watching them a little bit in La Liga just because of Zakarian. Remember that name, Zakarian. Well, that's all I really need to talk about. This probably went longer than I had anticipated, but my friends call me Fidel for a number of reasons. The fact that I, pontificate being one of them. Uh, this is Professor Matt. It is a pleasure, as always, to talk to you guys all, and for the entire Too Many Guys Soccer show crew. Das Vidania.